Star Trek, the not-so-final frontier. These are the voyages of the podcast On Screen. Its ongoing mission, to take you on a journey through film and television, to try not to ramble along the way too much, to boldly go where so many people have gone before. Hello everyone, and welcome to the next generation of On Screen. I'm your host, Dylan Wright, and I'm here to take you on a journey through film and television. So if you haven't guessed by the intro to the podcast that I worked really hard on getting the timing right, so I hope you appreciated it. We're going to talk about Star Trek this time. I think it's really appropriate since last year was the 50th anniversary of the esteemed franchise, and now we have a new series coming sometime this year. It's been delayed a couple times, so that's a little iffy, but from what has been released and what has been talked about, it seems like it's going to be a really good series, and I'm definitely going to watch it, and I'll give you guys my opinions on it when that comes up. But until then, let's take a retrospective look at the Star Trek series as a whole, from the very beginnings back in the 60s to present day with the J.J. Abrams verse, the Kelvin universe if you're a really big nerd. Let's just take a look at what this franchise has done for pop culture and for sci-fi as a whole. We'll kick things off by talking about the 1966 original series that started it all, Star Trek. Now, this is the series that's definitely the biggest in the public eye. Most people who haven't seen Star Trek know about, Mr. Spock and Kirk and the crew of the Enterprise and Live Long and Prosper and all of those kind of things. And they all originated from the original series created by Gene Roddenberry back in the 60s. For the time, it was a pretty progressive show in some of the casting choices. They had a black woman as part of the main crew, Nichelle Nichols as Uhura, the communications specialist. They had an Asian man, Mr. Sulu, played by the great George Takei. They even had a Russian on the ship starting in Season 2, Chekhov, played by Walter Koenig, who wasn't actually Russian, but we won't hold it against him. And this was during the height of the Cold War, so it was really progressive to have that kind of thing on television. Now, it's still definitely a product of the 60s. There's a lot of questionable choices in regards to the women on the show and the way that certain things are treated. But in other respects, it's really ahead of its time in some of the stuff it was talking about. It really hit a lot of political issues that were prevalent then and are still prevalent today. Sure, it gets really hokey at times, and it's one of the corniest shows ever. You only have to look to the main cast, William Shatner. Some of his line deliveries are just hilarious. Mr. Spock. There's even one episode where he shouts out this. No, blah, blah, blah! Or there's even this classic. I'm Captain Kirk! It's honestly pretty hilarious, but when it gets really deep, it hits. It really hits an emotional chord. I think only the episode called The City on the Edge of Forever, where Kirk has to make a choice on whether to save this woman he loves and risk the timeline being destroyed, or have her die so that everything fits in its rightful place and his crew can go on living. And he ultimately has to make the choice to let this girl that he fell in love with going back in time perish. And it's really hard for him, and the episode doesn't end on this corny, happy note that a lot of Star Trek episodes end on. It ends on Kirk being like, let's just get the hell out of here, like in this downtrodden way, and you really see the emotion on his face. The deep complexities of Star Trek only get better as the series goes on, and a lot of that has to do with the main three cast members, if you will. James T. Kirk, the captain, Leonard McCoy, Bones, as he's called, the medic, and Mr. Spock, the science officer / first officer of the ship. They have an ethos-pathos logos kind of relationship where Spock is the logic. He's thinking utilitarian, the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Bones McCoy is more of the emotional, we have to save them, Jim. You can't, are you out of your Vulcan mind? He's very emotional, and he wants people to not suffer, and he's a doctor, so that really makes sense for his character. And Kirk is kind of the guy that ties them all together, that takes the emotion and the logic and makes the right choice. And sometimes he doesn't make the right choice, but that's where the conflict lies mostly in the original Star Trek series. Funnily enough, Gene Roddenberry decided that even though there was conflict in the original series, the sequel series, The Next Generation, he didn't want any crew conflict, any fighting inside the crew, which you can't really have a story without conflict. So we just have this happy-go-lucky crew that gets along the entire time, and they go up against people, but they're never going to fight. So the series kind of suffered from that until Gene Roddenberry ultimately left, and then they were able to make great stories in The Next Generation. And a lot of people think that The Next Generation is possibly the best Star Trek series. You only have to look for the star of the series, Jean-Luc Picard, played by the esteemed Sir Patrick Stewart. If you thought that the gravitas of Leonard Nimoy was big in the original Star Trek, you haven't seen Patrick Stewart give a monologue about being assimilated by an alien species and losing his uniqueness. It's powerful, it's riveting, and they come up with some really good stories because of the gravitas of the actors that are in Next Generation. Sure, you have Wesley Crusher, played by the awesome Will Wheaton, who is a Mary Sue and gets the crew out of any jam that they're in, even though he's like a 12-year-old kid that's somehow on the crew of a starship because his mom is the chief medical officer. But for every Wesley Crusher, you have a Data, who is this android that's trying to find his humanity. He's very much the Spock character, where he's kind of the outsider, and it really works within the framework of the show, and it gives some really interesting philosophical arguments about what makes a human human. And ultimately, Star Trek as a whole of the series is about the best of humanity and how humanity could further its progress and make itself better. Gene Roddenberry, the creator, had such a high esteem for what humanity could become, and you could look at The Next Generation as kind of a socialist utopia where one of the supposed villains was this capitalist, greedy race of aliens called the Ferengi that ended up just being these over-the-top caricatures of, money-loving, deal-getting people. Gene Roddenberry really had a high view of what humanity could become and really wanted Star Trek to be the pinnacle of humanity. With the next series, Deep Space Nine, Gene Roddenberry was out of the picture because he had passed away, and they were able to tell these really dark stories. It's probably the darkest Star Trek series because it shows a flawed humanity. It shows a flawed mankind not making the right decisions sometimes, getting involved in affairs that maybe they shouldn't be involved in, not really making the right choices for the right people. And it's, in my opinion, the best series because it shows these conflicts that are very relevant to today and to the past. Like, there's this invading force that have ultimately been kicked out by the people that they, oppressed, and there's some really big Nazi parallels that are drawn. Like, what makes a person responsible? Is it the person giving the orders, or is it the person that actually carries it out? And there's some really deep episodes that have to do with responsibility and who's at fault. It's really compelling, it's really riveting, and it's really dark for Star Trek. You could say a lot about the next two series, Voyager, which is about a starship crew that's stranded 90 years from Earth, and they have to find a way to get back faster so that they're not dead by the time they get back. And the one after, Enterprise, which is basically a prequel to the whole series. But ultimately, they ended up being kind of a disappointment to fans because they didn't really feel like the past Star Trek in a way that the previous three series did. I mean, Voyager was closer than Enterprise. Enterprise was starting to get it towards the end of their seasons, but fell short. Voyager gets a lot of flack, and it really shouldn't be, as it has the most diverse cast, for one. It has the only female captain so far. I know there's going to be one in the new series, but that's pretty awesome. But there should have been one before, but it's pretty awesome that they had one that was leading a series and was such a compelling character up till a point. They ended up screwing the characters later on, but that's neither here nor there. The point of Star Trek is to just reflect on what the future could be like, what we could accomplish if we put our minds to it, and if we focus on making ourselves better, making humanity better, doing better than we have before. And it's a really admirable thing to aspire to. And a lot of astrophysicists and astronauts and people working in the field of conquering space cite Star Trek as their main inspiration for wanting to transcend the stars, to boldly go where no one has gone before. And it doesn't matter if you're a Star Trek fan or a Star Wars fan. You can't deny the impact that it's had on the future and the people that are helping make the future. it's set a blueprint that we could aspire to. We might not get fully there, but we could sure try to do it. That's what it's all about, really, is trying to make a better future for ourselves and for the next generation of people. So real quick, my Netflix pick of the week are the Star Trek series. Just go watch them. They're fun. They're cheesy at times. They're really deep and emotional at other times. And they're really fun to watch. I mean, my ultimate pick is Deep Space Nine, but just beware, you're going to get some spoilers for the next generation right off the bat. But if you're not worried about that, it really works as a standalone show, I think. There's some conflicts that happen in the next generation, but they're explained pretty well in Deep Space Nine, and the characters are just really endearing. There's nobody that is too annoying, and they do the Ferengi a lot better in that show than they did in the next generation. But definitely go check out the Star Trek shows. They're really good. They really have impacted science fiction and just television as a whole, and that's my Netflix pick of the week. So that's all the time I have for today. Sorry for geeking out about Star Trek for 10 minutes. If you guys have any future suggestions for topics on the show, please let me know. I would love to cover them. And until next time, live long and prosper.